This is Don't Get Me Started. This is a conversation about advertising. And here is your host, freelance creative director and creative circus department head, Dan Balser.
Yes, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Earlier this winter, I traveled to the freezing cold Midwest to visit my good friends at Barkley and to record a live conversation. This was a first for Don't Get Me Started. Katy Hornaday, who's been on the podcast before, you may recognize her name, is Executive Creative Director at Barkley in Kansas City. She's also an alumna of the Creative Circus and University of Missouri. So she and I, along with Kate Moore and Natalie Nowak of Barkley and Kim Boyce of the Creative Circus, traveled to Columbia and live-streamed a conversation in front of a few dozen very smart Mizzou students. Big thanks to Jamie Flink and John Stemmel, co-directors of the MOJO Ad Capstone, and the rest of the MOJO Ad faculty and School of Journalism for all their help. We pick up the conversation in progress in a lecture hall on campus at University of Missouri. Sitting with me is Katy Hornaday. If you don't know who Katy is, she is the Executive Vice President and Executive Creative Director at Barkley. Who has heard of Barkley? Who has not heard of Barkley? Hey, that's pretty cool. Katy has been named a Future Lion, which is a Cannes award, a Young Gun, which I believe is a one-show award out of New York, one of the 30 most creative people in advertising under 30, Adweek's Creative 100, one of the 30 most creative women in advertising, a Kansas City Business Journal Next Generation Leader. She's a member of the Creative Circus Advisory Board. She's checked the box on all the awards, but what she likes best is building teams and breaking the rules. Oh, and French fries. She very much likes French fries, which is in her LinkedIn bio. So, welcome.
Hi, guys. Thanks for coming.
What are some of the pieces of work that they might be familiar with that Barkley is responsible for, that so they could just kind of get a context about the work that Barkley does?
Yeah, so we do all the work for Dairy Queen. I told Dan when we were here, I said we do all the work for Missouri Lottery, which is worth noting to anybody who lives in Missouri because the spots are on all the time. We do Spirit Airlines. We have a whole bunch of clients. We've been doing a number of things for Square Enix, which is a video gaming company, Gallo Wines, which is a wine company. So all sorts of fun things in a really a large variety of different categories.
Gallo Wine is a wine company?
It's a wine company.
I also want to welcome people that might be watching this. This is what I look like. I'm sorry about that. So Katy graduated from this Creative Circus in 2008, and I also failed to mention a critical element, which is that she graduated from this very school in 2006. She's a Mizzou alum. So I want to talk, what I really want to do with Katy today for you guys is kind of go through what it might look like if you choose the creative career. And I want to talk a little bit about the school part of it, and then I want to transition into what it was like sort of starting the career and working her way to the role that she's in now. So the first question I have for you is kind of like, what did you actually learn at Mizzou? What did you actually learn at your grad school? Like, what did you think that you actually get out of the education component of it? What did you learn? Does the question make sense?
It does make sense. And Dan did tell me on the way down here that he was going to ask this, and I'm still a little bit dumbfounded.
You said you had answers to them, though.
I got answers all day long. I think, so I did exactly what you all did. I went to University of Missouri. I got into the J School. I chose StratCom. I'm a little bit odd. Maybe I'm not. Maybe you guys are all exactly like me in this sense. But like when I was in high school, I was on the yearbook staff, and somebody came in and said that they were at Mizzou and that they were going to go to portfolio school after that. And I was like, okay, that's what I want to do with my life. And I just sort of like followed that. So I did StratCom here. I was super involved with my sorority. So I actually think when you ask a question like, what did I learn when I was at Mizzou? I think in so many realms, I learned so much. I think from being in the journalism school, I learned a ton about the ability to storytell. I learned even more about how much I wanted to be in advertising. I feel like I definitely came out of MU really crystal clear that this is what I wanted to do, but also being involved in campus activities. Right before this, we were just talking about how much everybody really gets involved at MU. At least that's the way it felt. And I think that you learn a ton from that. The way to lead, the way to collaborate. And I think all of those things have served me really well in advertising and in other parts of my life. And then once I left MU and I decided to go to the Creative Circus.
Hold on a second. So when you were at MU, and you said you wanted to go into advertising, did you know at that point what the jobs were? Like what the opportunities for career were while you were in undergrad? Was that clear?
Yes.
You guys know that kind of stuff?
I mean, as a senior in high school, I was like, I want to be a creative director.
I didn't know that.
I want to be a creative director in New York. Like, this is how I'm going to get there.
Okay, all right, okay.
It was weird. But are you guys like that? Like, did you know? How many of you want to be creatives? You do? Okay. So everybody's sort of starting to figure out what part.
How many of you aren't so sure? Okay, so you're
That's
still
okay
trying to
too.
figure that out. Okay.
So
what about research and planning? Okay, and what about account management? Okay.
Nice.
Interesting.
Great. So I think then leaving MU and going to the Creative Circus for me was really about, I don't know, I felt like I got to those last few semesters and I had started to be surrounded by people who wanted to do the same things I wanted to do. And so I was really excited by 2 years of just being surrounded by people who only wanted to do what I wanted to do. So I think when I was at the circus, I learned a lot. I learned how to fail. They do these things called panels where you work on work for a quarter and then you bring it in and you show it to a panel of people and they tell you if they think it's good or not good. And I actually had Dan on one of my panels one time and I was convinced that I was terrible at this. Whatever comment he made, I was like, I am awful. I'm never going to get a job.
That's on you. That's on you, dude. That wasn't,
but I
did
think
not say anything.
That was super indicative of what that time was for me, though, was learning to fail in some regard
Right.
and get
Can you
back
stop
up.
for a second?
Yeah.
Can you define what you mean by fail? Because I think I think you guys have probably heard that, like, embrace failure, but I'm not sure that it's really clear what that means, because there's a way to fail where you're failing and there's a way to fail that actually pushes you forward. So what do you mean you learned how to fail?
Well, I think that's a great question because I am super duper type A. Does anybody else want to be a creative, but you're also type A? These are things that are so at odds with each other, guys. And for me, things were really black and white. You either got straight A's or you were failing. And that doesn't really work in the creative world because things are so subjective and there are many opinions on things. And so failing really wasn't failing, but it felt like if people weren't raving about what I was doing, that I wasn't doing it well. And huge piece for me was getting a tough skin, accepting the fact that I wasn't going to do everything perfectly, and that I was going to succeed at some things and I was not going to succeed at others, but really, and this will sound so trite, but like success was just figuring out how to get back up and do it all over again, which took a ton for me to learn because again, I was like, you were either straight A's or you were failing, and straight A's in the creative world, that doesn't even exist. So it was an interesting journey.
Right. See, I one thing that I think is important, and I know I'm supposed to be interviewing you, but I'm going to say some things too, is I think that when you approach, one thing that I try to instill in our students, which I think is important to anyone going into the creative field, is to lower the expectations of what success means. In other words, to just try things without any expectation of it being any good. And I'll use this podcast as an example. I did it because it was just seemed like a fun thing to do, to record conversations. And here I am, 300 episodes later, and it's really been an incredible experience because I didn't expect it to be good right away. And I think that sometimes there's a misplaced sense of perfection that has to be there when you're learning to do something, where if you do it wrong, if you do it badly, then you've done it wrong. But doing something badly is where you learn. And I think that it's important to get comfortable, maybe not having the right answer, but coming up with just a whole bunch of different answers. So let's talk a little bit about leaving school, starting the career at Crispin Porter and Bogusky, right? So what was the big adjustment from school to the real world? And talk a little bit about sort of the day in the life or sort of your experience at the first job.
Yeah. So I always go back to this one memory that I had at the circus. They always had people come in and talk who were at different agencies. They call them forums. It's on Friday. And there was this guy from an agency called Boone Oakley. And I remember him coming in and saying, the best piece of advice I got when I was leaving school, and this is for any leaving school, is that you know nothing about the real world. You only know about how to succeed in school. And I was like, I remember hearing that and thinking, oh my gosh, okay, so I'm basically going to walk into a job as a total blank slate. I don't know anything. I'm just going to figure it out as I go. So I feel like having that mentality helped a lot because truly when I got into agency life, I didn't know anything. What I knew was that I was a hard worker and I wanted to be great and I was willing to do whatever it took in order to make that happen. So at Crispin, so Crispin is in Boulder. At the time I walked in the door, which was really cool. I walked in on the day that we were given the brief for the Old Navy pitch. So I had the amazing luxury of being able to see a piece of business from the moment that we were briefed to pitching it, to winning it, to relaunching a brand, all the way through 2 years of really like seeing that come to life, which was super cool and really, really helpful for me in my career overall. And really day in and day out, this was a job that was like an 80-hour-a-week job. If you're going to take one of those, take it when you're fresh out of school. But when,
that's common. Do you think there are places like that still that have that sort of mentality?
I don't think as much anymore. And Crispin's not even like that anymore. It was just a time and a place.
It was infamous for that.
Yeah. And you know what? I wouldn't trade it for anything. My day to day was show up at 9 and basically work until like midnight or 2 a.m. And the cool thing there was that everybody was really hungry to want to do really great work. So you were surrounded by a whole team of people. And the best thing about it is that everybody sort of was on an even playing field. So there was no hierarchy of, oh, you're a junior, you only get to do the banner ads. Oh, you're a senior, you're the one who gets to do all the television ads or whatever. It was really whoever had the best idea got to do it, which was great, but it also meant you had to work your butt off because you were clawing your way to try and get a TV ad created, as well as you had to make sure that the banner ads that were on your plate, you were going to make those great too. But so every day was really just showing up and grinding through covering walls with ideas and then hoping that our creative director likes something.
That's cool. I want to go back a second to school and ask you this question. I kind of forgot to do that. If you could go back to the day you started here and you could reverse engineer, like what is something that you wish you had done in school or something that you think was valuable that you did do in school that prepared you? Is it, if there was a way to kind of whisper something in your ear as you were just starting this, if you're just starting to navigate this career where these guys are sitting, what should they be doing or looking at to help sort of propel them? Or maybe there's not an answer to that.
I don't know if this is the like proper answer, but I was really, really worried about my grades all the time. And I really wish I would have had a little bit more life experience while I was here, honestly. I sometimes say I wish I would have overdrawn my bank account a time or two more and would have just had a little more fun. And I don't say that because like, oh, it's college and you should party. But I think when I've looked back on my life, I've realized that I learn a lot in places that sometimes aren't like in this perfect square of what I thought my exact path was supposed to be. So this is not, I'm not telling you to overdraw your bank account every other week. Oh my God, your parents are going to kill me. But there, I do think I was so worried about just like what my GPA was going to be at the end of it that maybe I lost focus on, some other experiences that I could have had that would have behooved me earlier in my career.
That makes sense. All right. So advertising is a career path that you don't sign up and work for a company till you retire. You might move a time or two. So you were at Crispin, Porter, and Bogusky for a little over 2 years, and then moved to Boston to work at Mullen, right? Is that right? So why did you leave? What was the lure? What was the impetus for you to move to another city and another agency?
Well, so my husband went to the University of Missouri as well. I met him on the Delta Upsilon deck, and I just told my daughter that story the other night. And
she'll never forget that story.
It's interesting when you're both in agencies, sometimes you move because you're ready to move on to another agency and sometimes you move because the other one is. And so, at that point it was actually John. He had been at Crispin, the entire time that I was in portfolio school. So by the time I had been there for 2.5 years, he had been there for 5 and like, at that time, that was like dog years. And so he was really ready to try something new. So we decided to give Boston a shot. I often talk about, we were talking a little earlier about when you come out of school, do you want to go into nonprofit? Do you want to go into corporate? Do you want to go into a big agency, a small agency? And I always say, like, I don't think you totally know what you want to do until you try a few things. So for context, Crispin is a pretty large agency and had a really great track record for doing really great creative at the time when I was there. And then when we left and we went to Mullen is in Boston. Before we had gotten there, they had typically been they were actually in a mansion out in the woods outside of Boston.
Literally.
They were in a mansion outside of way out. And so people would travel there every day and go work there. And they had been a really great agency, but they had sort of started to be known as a more traditional place. And about 2 years before we got there, they had brought in all new leadership. They had moved the entire agency into the city, and they were really in this sort of like revitalization of what they were and what they were going to become. And walking into Mullen, coming from my experience at Crispin, was actually really incredible for me. It was this opportunity to see where at Crispin, is a really well-oiled machine. You walked in, everything was, it was functioning in a certain way, and you became a part of that. Whereas when I got to Mullen, I felt like I got to be a piece of building something, which turned out to be exactly what I wanted.
But you didn't know that was...
I didn't know that at all.
So why was it on the radar? Why was that an option?
A recruiter.
Okay.
A recruiter reached out, and by the time that I said yes to Mullen, I knew that's what I was walking into, and that's what excited me, because I liked the challenge of.
So what happens is when you're successful, like you were at Crispin, recruiters start to push. Yeah, you start to become sort of a brand in your own self, right?
Yeah.
So people are looking to place you and move you.
Yeah. And can I give you one piece of advice? When recruiters reach out to you, always respond, even if you don't want their job. You just respond and tell them why you're not ready for that job, because you never know what could change. And as Dan and I were talking, when you get into this industry, you will learn that it is a very, very small industry.
It's so small.
It feels big, but it's small. Don't ever burn a bridge. Always be kind. And if a recruiter reaches out, just tell them thank you.
Right. The CEO at Barkley, her boss, was my brother's partner years ago. That's pretty tight right there. That's a small circle. So, okay, yeah. So you went to Boston, and it turned out to be a huge opportunity to help build something.
Yeah, and it was great. So I was there for 2 years. I think we would have stayed in Boston forever. But this is one of those great moments where my career became not really about just me and my career. We had a daughter. We were living in Boston. All of our friends and family were still in Missouri, and we decided that really we wanted to get back to, I always say, our village. So we decided to start looking. Both John and I have no intention of stopping working. And so we wanted to have a support system, and we definitely wanted to do it in a place where we felt like we could continue to do great work. And so 6 years ago, we decided to move back after we interviewed at Barkley, and we both fell in love with the place. So we've been there for 6 years.
Fell in love with it. Why? What attracted you?
I felt like when I walked into Barkley, I was finally in an agency that was really clear on what its culture was. It wasn't fabricated, but it knew culture? Who it was. Have you guys been inside of agencies yet? Like maybe taking tours and things? You know how I've never worked in any other industry, so I don't know what it's like elsewhere, but I feel like agencies tend to have a culture of, some have a culture of fun, some have a culture of hard work, some have a culture of, I think that at Barkley we have a culture of kindness. We don't hire assholes. We work hard, but we care about the people that we work with. And I kind of felt that immediately when I walked in there. And I think that if you can get that foundationally right, the rest of it will come along. So that's kind of what I felt when I walked in.
Cool. All right. I'm going to change gears a little bit, talk differently about the career so far. So looking back so far at your short and illustrious career so far, what's been sort of a highlight, one of the favorite moments, exciting, or just one of the best stories you can share with just being in this career? I'm
going to pick a totally random one.
That's good.
Okay.
I think they all are.
So I think I've done more things that people would say are more glamorous than the story I'm going to tell right now. But about 4 years ago, we had a client, honeysuckle white turkey. Doesn't that sound very glamorous? But what was cool about the client is that they really were ready to tell consumers the story about how they raise their birds, and they raise their birds on these family farms. So turkeys and farmers, that's not a new story at all. And they really trusted us to try and find a different way to be able to tell that story. And we came up with this idea that we would pair these farmers that owned these family farms with an international graffiti artist, and have the artist and the farmer sit down and talk about the farmer's story. And then the artist would come up with a mural to paint on the side of their barn that was not an advertisement. It was truly just a piece of art that lived on their farm, that was indicative of that farmer's story. And probably one of the coolest moments of my career was standing on the side of a barn. It was actually like right outside of Columbia. We did them all over the country, but this one in particular, the man, a farmer named Glenn, he had lost his father a few years earlier, and the artists had created this mural that is this giant turkey with a tiny baby turkey next to it. And that was always the plan for the mural. But in the week leading up to it, the artist had, in getting to know the family, had come across a hat that had belonged to the man's father who had passed away. And they integrated the hat into the bigger turkey's onto his head as part of the art. And so when the art was finally revealed to the farmer, I was standing on the side of the barn when this man saw sort of this beautiful piece of work of art that was on the side of his barn that suddenly was really a tribute to his father. And he just like bawled. And it was this cool moment of feeling like, wow, when we make advertising, sometimes we just make advertising and sometimes we like actually make an impact on people. And it was just really cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. So this might be a question for Kate and Natalie, for the recruiters at Barkley. I have a question you can answer, and you guys can chime in if you have any responses. But what are the valuable traits that you see demonstrated in the people that you want to hire at an agency? Like, what are you looking for out of people contacting you or showing you work, or what's important more than just the work or the resume? You want to?
Kate and Natalie are the front lines of defense, so they probably have great answers.
Bring a microphone back for you. I'll bring them. No, yeah, but I want to be able to hear it on the internet if someone's actually. I think one of the two viewers of this might want to.
I have a super simple one. You speak to us over the phone usually. You will speak to a recruiter over the phone usually. Sounds so silly, but smile when you are talking to them, because we are truly the gateway spokespeople for you in an organization, and we can take our conversation with you and evangelize that within the organization itself. And so having energy, having a story to tell, being able to kind of summarize your experience and run with a conversation is so important, not only in the interview process, but also when you're in front of a client and you just need to have small talk with someone on a day-to-day basis. So just remember that it starts at the beginning.
That's a great one. Very true. I think another thing that really stands out to us is the drive. I think there's kind of a common misconception that you graduate college with an amazing degree. You guys are legs ahead of a lot of your competition, but that dream job isn't always going to be the first thing that comes up. So it really stands out to us when we see people that come up to us at career fairs, that reach out to us for informational interviews, that connect with the people that they know that are Mizzou grads at Barkley, things like that, to where your name kind of stands out with us. And making that effort and building relationships in this industry that is so small is so helpful. And I think really stands out when it shows that you guys want it.
And my daughter is a freshman in college now, and part of what they look for in the application process is demonstrated interest. Yeah. So that's really interesting. Do you have an answer too about what you don't look at a lot of?
I don't look at a lot of like junior portfolios. So for context, the way that the Barkley creative department is split up, it's 4 teams. 1 sits in Boulder, 3 sit in Kansas City, and they have creative directors at the top of them. So usually the creative directors are the ones who are interviewing candidates, and then when they feel good about someone, they'll bring them to me. But I certainly have my checklist of things that I like to see when someone starts.
Yeah, that's my next question.
Yeah, and I mean, it's really tactical stuff. I'm assuming that if you come in the door that you have passed the drive test, that you're a good human, that you have a great book, that you want to do this. But then it's things like taking notes in meetings when you're getting feedback, making sure that, you're taking feedback and sort of taking it with a smile, like having a positive attitude, being able to sort of have an endless wealth of ideas and energy that goes along with it. I think one of the beautiful things, I told this to the interns last summer, was, you come into an agency with your first job, and the best part is nobody expects that you have it all figured out. So ask the questions that feel dumb. Put the idea on the wall that you think might be stupid. You get a pass for all of that the first few years of your career, and use it. So I think that's what I'm always looking for is I think that fresh new talent in an agency, one of the best things it can do is bring in great energy, and sort of that wide-eyed excitement about the career that you've just started that reminds everybody else what it felt like to start in this awesome industry. So, yeah, bring that.
That's cool. So I've been doing a podcast for 12 years, and when I do this podcast, it's all in the audio, and I'm always imagining I know my audience, I know who's listening. I kind of guide the conversation a certain way with a certain listener in mind, but I never have the benefit of being in the room with them. So as well as I may be thinking this conversation is going, I want to know if you guys have any questions or things you wish we were talking about. Let's open it up to you guys. Do you guys have anything that's on your mind, either about advertising education or about the career in advertising? I'm going to bring you the mic. I'll get to you second.
I'm Ben Kokite. I'm a copywriter right now. This is a little bit further down the road, but I was curious what kind of things separate like a senior level creative from like a creative director?
That's a great question. The simplest way I would say is if you looked at sort of the hierarchy, it becomes the ability to self-edit and edit in a way and manage. So as you move up, when you first start out, you are going to put every idea, every headline out on the table. And someone above you is going to say, oh, I think this one's good and this one's good and this one's good. And then as you get more seasoned, you're going to be able to sort of self-edit those things out, and you're going to be ready for someone to be underneath you who you can sort of help guide to better work, better ideas, better writing. And kind of as you move up each tier, there's just more people that you're guiding and that you're mentoring. And I think it's important to look at it that way, because sometimes people want to wait until they're a creative director or an ACD in order to manage people or mentor people or really be responsible for better ideas. And I think if you look at your career as every rung on the ladder is an opportunity to mentor someone else or more people or to edit to better ideas, you're going to get there faster, because people are going to see that ability in you much quicker than just waiting for it to happen when you're, 5 years into your career.
On the flip side, I want to make a comment about mentoring, because I went from ad school straight to New York, worked at a big agency in New York called Ogilvy May. They're now called Ogilvy. And you'll always hear about find a mentor, get a mentor. Mentorships don't happen. There's not necessarily someone senior level that's going to come down the hall and check in and see, hey, how are things going? It's something that you have to make. And I will say also that having been also a senior copywriter and associate creative director, having people come to you for advice is actually really flattering. So you're not really bothering someone by going into someone's office and saying, can you look at this? But I do really strongly encourage, when you guys get jobs, to try to make those mentorships happen by asking questions, raising your hand, going and knocking up, and be respectful, be respectful of their time, but definitely do that. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry. I was wondering what some of the things you do whenever you feel like you're in a creative rut and you just are sitting there with no ideas.
That never happens to me. No, happens all the time.
I have an answer too.
Yeah, well, you answer first. No, I keep going first. You go. Okay, fine. Okay, so I have a few different things that I use, and I think everybody will give you a totally different answer. For me, if it's a writing or an idea that I'm trying to get to, a lot of times I'll just free write. So I'll just open a doc. For some reason in my brain, it has to be a super fresh, clean Word doc. No clue why that matters. And I just start writing, like really stream of consciousness, and I will sort of dump down paragraphs and paragraphs of things that are loosely connected to each other. And then a lot of times I'll like print it out and then go back and highlight like, oh, that's an interesting turn of phrase. Oh, there's an interesting thought there. And then I move those over into a fresh doc. This sounds very neurotic. But like that's sometimes the way that I'll get to it. The other thing I've tried really hard to do is find different places that can give me inspiration that I'm maybe not looking at every day, but I can go to them when I get stuck. So I love music videos. I don't watch them every day, but music videos are cool because they're 2-minute concepts that you can watch back to back to back to back. And they're, if you watch through, like a YouTube channel, or even I used to go to a gym that just had like a music video channel on it. Maybe they have that at the gym here. It was awesome because you could see all of these different ways of approaching something, visual ways and concept ways. And that used to sort of get me unstuck sometimes. And then also like, you might not have it now. When you get into an agency, you'll have a partner, but just finding somebody to sort of throw around ideas. There are some people who are best when they just put their head down and they're alone. I like to sort of be in a conversation with people. I sort of get fueled by, oh, you said this and that made me think of that. So those are kind of my 3 go-tos.
Do you see the Migos Walk It, Talk It video? Oh, it's so great. So great. And I showed it to my kid. You guys seen it? Who's seen that? so my kids were like, what? This is terrible. And we went and watched an old Soul Train video. He's like, they just totally stole Soul Train. That's number one, is don't try to be right. The hardest writing is, I think there's some famous quote that writing is 90% editing. I think as a writer, for me, I never read what I've written. I just write and write and write and write. But that's not the answer to the question that you asked. The question that you asked was, what happens if you don't have ideas? And for me, I first of all, I know this for a fact, that the best solutions come from the best problems. And I think 9 times out of 10, if I don't have an idea, it's because what I'm trying to solve is not the real problem. So I constantly circle back to what's the brief, what am I actually trying to say? Because if you are trying to say something empty, you're going to bring it. And I think this is kind of true for any project you're working on. If you're finding it really difficult to find ideas, you probably have started down the wrong road, kind of a barren road. You need to find the fertile part. So for me, I circle back to the brief, and then I'll do that, and I won't look at it. And then one of the most important, this is coming from an educator too, one of the most important things I think that you can learn as a young creative is objectivity. And I define that by being able to turn away from your work and look back at it as if someone else had written it or you didn't come up with it. And sometimes that means going to the gym. Sometimes that means completely leaving it, watching TV. Distractions are terrible and ubiquitous. However, sometimes they're really valuable to be able to move away. So you can wake up and when I say I don't read what I've written, I don't read it till tomorrow, so that I can look at it and say, oh, that's really cool. I forgot even thinking that. But I think that often if you're stuck, it's because the instructions are out of whack. They're in another language, or they're not resonating with you and you're not feeling them. And I would encourage you to rethink what you're trying to say before you try to say it in a cool way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. I love that. Look at that. We have a helper. We have a mobile microphone. This is
so. Coming out of portfolio school and entering your first job at an agency, was there anything that sort of like surprised you or was unexpected to you within the industry?
Well, I always tell this story. When I was at the Creative Circus, they used to always tell us, like, don't worry about writing TV ads. No one's going to make you write a TV ad on your first day of work. Lo and behold, my first day, I got a brief for a Volkswagen TV commercial. So that surprised me. But that worked out all right. As far as things that...
It was for me. You want to think about that some more?
Yeah, go ahead. Go.
So for me, what surprised me was, because I went to a portfolio school. And at portfolio school, 90% of your success is how good you are, your talent, your ideas. And 10% is sort of all this tertiary, secondary stuff like strategic thinking and interacting with people. When you get to the real world, it's like maybe not everybody cares about a great idea. Maybe people have their own agendas. Maybe there's something about placating to, like, maybe there's a client that's scared of something, or people are scared for their own job. So for me, a huge adjustment from school to the real world was that, like, it's not 90%, it's 90% the other stuff. Everybody's talented. Everybody can come up with good ideas. It's about how resilient you are, about how professional you are, about how you understand. And I'll tell you a super short story. So I was at an agency that I worked on all the advertising, everything that Fujifilm did for 2.5 years. So it was all the consumer film, professional cameras, consumer cameras. When they moved agencies, the client, the woman who runs their business, asked me to move with them. And I don't think it was because I was a good writer. I think it was because I made her meetings better. So she was a woman in a very male-dominated Japanese company who needed somebody in there that could relate to the rest of the group and make her job easier. And that's not something that you learn in school. That's not something that was valuable in school. That's not something we ever talked about in school. But it's sort of like you moving into the real world. There's real money on the line, or real jobs on the line. And everybody's got their own agendas. That was a little bit of an adjustment for me to kind of figure out. And I don't know how you prepare for it. I think it's sort of like, I've had these students that I had students that come off as arrogant, right? And they're not. They're insecure. And I tell them, people think you're arrogant. People think you're cocky. And then, well, what am I supposed to do? It's like, you just need to know that people think you're arrogant and people think you're cocky. Maybe you be nice. Just know that. So when I say that, is like going into the real world, there's nothing you can do to prepare for that other than know that there's things you can't prepare for, I think.
I think there's so much that you're not prepared for, honestly. There's great things and there are like not great things. But yeah, it is weird getting into a place where when you're in school, even when you're in portfolio school, like everything is based around your idea. And you're in control of the brief, and you're in control of, you know, the feedback and what ends up in your portfolio. And, you know, here you're in control of, you know, your assignment, partners. Even with Mojo, like that client doesn't come into it really every single day and give you these little things that are changing with their business, or you know, dynamics of a client relationship within the agency, dynamics of the agency to each other. So yeah, there's just a lot of things that you have to navigate, and I continue to go back to resilience. If you can keep at it and keep at it and be positive, that is huge. You'll be so much happier for it.
I think it's probably the most important trait is resilience. Mm-hmm. Do we have another hand? Yeah, we have hands. Good. Oh, I don't have to pick. That's good.
Thanks. Hi, Katy and Dan. My question is a little bit different than the creative questions, but when we are graduating and entering this industry, there's so many different types of companies that we can look at, whether it's corporate, agency, large or small. What were some of the benefits that you experienced when starting your careers at a large agency like Crispin Porter or Ogilvy?
I think one thing that's great about big agencies is there's a process. You walk into a really well-oiled machine. You have a lot of tiers of people that can help. I think sometimes, you know, I had a few juniors one time tell me a few years ago, because Barkley's a little bit flatter, compared to that. So we have about 50 people in our creative department. At Crispin, it was like 150. So I had some creatives a few years ago say, I really wish that I had a layer between us and you so that I had more filtering before my ideas got to you. Now that's everybody's different opinion. I think there's a lot of value in not having to wade through layers, but sometimes it can be a nice security blanket when you're first starting out. I think when you're in bigger companies, you know, you have more resources. Just as the company grows, there are, you know, more and more things that you can tap into. I don't know how much you guys are tracking this, but big agencies are becoming like gigantic agencies right now as everything folds into itself. So I don't know what it's going to be like to be part of, you know, one agency that used to be 6 agencies. That might be a whole different set of things as you guys enter the workforce. But at the time, you know, a Crispin was a pretty large agency by the standards then.
Start thinking about, this is serious, start thinking about what fulfills you and makes you happy. What is it? When are you happiest? Yeah. When are you happiest and why? And I say that because this gets personal. My podcast is super personal. So I went to a huge agency, awesome resources, the full studio, amazing, huge, big budget accounts, lots of television. This is oversharing a little bit. I tend to overshare. I felt like at that place, if I didn't go in tomorrow, no one would even notice the difference. Like it was 250 creatives in that department. And you can tell I have a bit of an ego. I hope it doesn't get in the way, but I need to know that I need to see your faces, right? So I wasn't ever truly happy at the big agency because I kind of felt like I was just like a little bit of shaving of metal on one gear in a giant machine. So I moved to a place that was the entire agency was 65 people. We were just a dozen creatives, and it was the happiest I've ever been in advertising. We ran our own accounts, and that's personal, right? That's what I value. I cared more about mattering at work than about my cousins at Thanksgiving knowing the commercials that I was working on. So you go to a big agency because your cousins at Thanksgiving will have seen those commercials. I worked on Dow Plastics, AGFA, Ingersoll Rand Construction and Mining Equipment, nothing anyone's ever seen, but I loved it. It was the most fun I've ever had in the business. So I think I think part of your task as young adults in your late 20s, after you get out of here, is to start to figure out what you want out of life. Do you want a lot of money? Do you want to win awards? Do you want to run an agency? There are people, and you asked the question about moving from a senior to creative director. Not every senior creative wants to be a creative director. Some people want to be designers and art directors and writers, and they don't want to supervise. And frankly, some of them shouldn't be. They're promoted because they're good at one thing to another job that they have no training or ability in. She happens to be a gifted leader, but I have other alumni who've graduated from school that I don't care how many awards they win, they shouldn't be supervising anybody. So you have to figure out what is important to you, right? That's really, and I don't think, having said that, there is a value on your resume to having gone to those places. Your resume looks a little better that great big brand name place hired you, and you will learn things, and there is a much wider margin of error allowed at those places. You can screw up pretty badly. It won't cost much because there's a lot of redundancy in a bigger place. So that's a mixed answer. Typically, the general answer is big agencies have big budgets. Small agencies, you're going to wear more hats, meaning you're going to work on a lot of different things. You're more likely to get things produced. Huge benefit to that as well. I'm biased towards the smaller places.
But he did say something that's great, just to be super, put a point on it. Bigger agency, bigger clients. Because in order to service the Fords, of the world, you have to have a bazillion people. When you have a bazillion people, you get to be a bigger agency. So yeah, one major benefit to it is if you want to work on big, huge accounts,
right?
That's where it happens.
Right. I went from working on Jaguar, Hershey's, and IBM to working on the ones I just named, which are much smaller ones. And I was happier, but there's a trade-off.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Drew. I'm currently a graphic designer. So my question, I guess, is for both of you. Have you ever found it hard to be passionate about your work when you weren't passionate about the client?
No, not for me. Here's why. And I think I struggle to answer it just because I don't think I had this clarity until a few years ago. I think I got really clear a few years ago that what I love about what I do is building and galvanizing teams. So I am really, really hell-bent on our department at Barkley feeling like a close-knit family. And so for me, as long as I'm doing it alongside those people, and as long as I have a team of people who feel that closely connected and who have each other's backs, I don't really care what we're working on. And I would say, again, it's probably not something that you get to right out of the gate, but the faster you can get clear on why you get up every morning, and not having it be connected to the things that can change, the faster you'll be happy in this industry, I would say.
So it's a great question. It's a really good question. So I'm going to tell a short story about an alumnus named Kervins Chauvet. He works at Wieden and Kennedy in Portland, and came to work one day, and it was the day after one of these horrible police shootings of an African American, and people were just like, "Hey, Kervins, how's it going?" Everybody's just acting like their normal day, and he writes an email about what it's like to be a black man in America in 2018. 2017, I guess. And it was heavy and it was real. And he sent an all office email to the entire agency, and it started getting shared, and it started getting shared again, and it started getting posted, and it became a Nike equality spot that he basically, the genesis of it came out of his insight. And his insight was honesty and truth about how you feel about the culture and the world that we live in. And the question was actually asked to him at school when he did a forum, that exact question. He said, if you don't care about it, nobody's going to care about it. And you've got to be honest about a way that you can, so that the work resonates with truth, so that the work that you do feels honest to people. That also, if you don't care about, most people don't care about, no offense, turkey or whatever it is. So how can you care about it? You don't have to. You have to be honest about it, so that the people that see that work will feel the same way you do about it. And it's about being really truthful. Yeah. Having said that, I had a partner in New York who refused to work on cigarette brands, and just don't do it. If you have a moral or ethical issue with a brand, don't work on it. That's very different than not caring about socks or underwear or something like that.
Yeah, but I think that's great. Is if when you're looking at something, if you find all the angles possible to find a way to be passionate about it, or sometimes you're not the target, and really the best way to find passion for a brand is to really find empathy for who your target is, and then it can be more interesting. But again, I try to staying focused on my team, staying focused on the people that I get to do this with every day. That helps me no matter what I'm working on.
To answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
I over-answered as always. I did, didn't I? Overshared.
Hello. I was curious what you guys think the next frontier is in advertising.
Mars for sure, right? Advertising on Mars? Definitely. Outdoor boards on Mars.
Mars. That's a really good question right now. I think the whole industry is trying to figure it out at this moment. I have a lot of theories that would take us a very long time. I think a few of them are, I was telling Dan on the way down here, I was in Cannes this last year for the International Advertising Festival, and I felt like there was this idea that we had to choose sides between data and creative. And I just think that's kind of bogus. I think that where we're headed is we have to find a world where those two coexist because we need both of them. I think there's a lot that's changing in the industry right now, and I have this theory that we're going to sort of cycle through some things, and then we're going to come back to where we were before, as far as where creativity's places in advertising, as far as how big an agency should be, as far as what should be in-house and what should be out of it. I just think there are so many things that are shifting. Hopefully we're shifting toward getting some stability, but yeah, I guess for me, I think it's really figuring out how creativity and data live together. I don't think it's enough to say, oh, we have the data, we know who you are, we know where you are, and we know what you're doing, so let's just put a message in front of you. I think in order to break through, we have to find a way to bring creativity to those spaces and to build brands. So I think it's just going to be doing that. Do you have a theory? Because I'll listen to yours.
We were talking about this earlier, and I may be an outlier in this. I think that some of the really talented creatives are working for brands now, not for agencies. Some really great work is coming out of in-house jobs. So when you guys are up for jobs, you graduate, you want to be an art director, copywriter, designer, don't rule out the possibility of going to work in-house. Yes, it's the same brand over and over again, but some great work. I don't know if you guys have been watching some of the stuff that Apple's done for the holidays, and they have a really robust in-house creative group. And the platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Google, Airbnb. We have a lot of really talented people that come out of our school that are now working in-house for brands. So will it go back to agencies? Will the agency relationship change? Probably. I see that as something. And I just think that even though this is pretty robust now, I still think that the opportunity for engagement with brands has changed. And it's changed so much that it's not about advertising. It's about brand engagement. I'm a big fan of Atlanta United soccer team. And they have a... What?
Silent yes over here. Yes.
Yes. So I finagled my way to do this podcast to go in-house and talk to the woman that runs all of their, it's not called advertising. It's called marketing and fan engagement. And they have an in-house group that just goes out with 4K video and does video of training sessions that they push out into their social. That's what advertising is. They don't spend any extra money. They don't have an agency that does it. They have maybe a run and gun team of 8 in-house. They do these things on Fridays in their inaugural season that was Flag Friday, that they would put like Atlanta United garden flags in parks, and they would announce it like at 6:30 in the morning, and you go out and grab them, and they'd have like swag taped to the back of random ones of those. It doesn't cost them much. That's where advertising is going. It's about feeling an affinity with a brand knowing who it is and who their users are, versus sort of this interruptive sort of messaging thing. So I don't know how you apply that other than thinking about brands as more than a product and more than just an interruption. I don't know. I think is that fair? Okay.
Totally.
More questions? Hi, my name is Jasmine. I have a question that kind of relates to the account side of advertising. So after school, I hope to be either like an account manager or on the strategy side. So from a creative standpoint, what do you got, like what type of advice do you have for people that want to work in account to make sure that relationship with creative is positive and like we aren't stepping on toes or
care about it. Love creative. Love good commercials. Be able to name them. Like actually care about the work. Like have a passion for good work. No good work. Sorry.
He's right. So my husband, who I mentioned earlier, he's an account director at Barkley, and he has his own portfolio site. So his portfolio is the brands he's worked on, the business case studies he's been a part of. I think our best people who work on the brand side, the account side, are people who have as much invested in the work as we do. It's a really interesting job. It's a hard job. There are lots of times at night when I'm like, John, I am so glad you're having that conversation and I'm not, because you have to straddle this line between understanding the client and knowing what's best for them, and understanding the agency and knowing that sometimes the agency knows some things that the client can't see because their brand is right in front of their face. I think it's a really cool and exciting job to have, and trying to figure out how to both, I think, create empathy on both sides So I think finding a way to be as invested in the work, and even as you come out of school, we were talking earlier, is there a way for you to have a portfolio of the brands that you've been a part of, even outside of like a MOJO or something, or even brands that you love? I think it's good when, and it used to sort of be that like if you were on the account side, you were the business part, and that's all you did. But I think now the expectation is that you will understand what makes a brand tick, you will understand what makes the agency tick, and you will understand how the two of them can sort of coexist in a really special way. So any way that you can sort of show that off and then get into an agency and make the most of it is awesome. Does that help?
AdAge has a thing you can subscribe, Creativity Online, creativity-online.com. They'll send you an email, and if you don't pay for it, you get to click like 3 things, but it's how I kind of stay up on the work that's being done, and I have the most respect for the account people I've worked with that just love the work, that are just so excited about seeing and presenting the work. It's really important. Be curious. We'll get to you.
Hi, I'm Zach. I'm an art director as well. As someone who's a bit more type A in the creative field, do you have any recommendations for working with people who are less type A and kind of galvanizing the team in that direction?
Find other type A's and stick together. You know what? I will say, the further I get into my career, the more I have to recognize that there is a lot of value to people who can operate a little bit more in chaos, especially as creatives. I tend to, our chief idea officer told me a few weeks ago, he goes, you can turn anything into a task. And I can, like anything. I can like make a to-do list for it. But sometimes there's value in sort of being able to like not know where you're headed. So I guess I would say finding ways to understand what value they're bringing to the table. And then also, like, let's be honest, if you're a type A, you don't really need 300 other alpha dogs in the mix. So find a way to lead gently with those people and you bring your value. So if you're going to make a to-do list, you make a to-do list and then that person doesn't have to do it. Okay, that's great. Now they're going to help you look at the world in a different way. And eventually you're going to fill your to-do list. I think, just not shutting down because they're not contributing as much as you are, which I think is typically what we do, right? We go, I'm doing it all. So yeah, I think just look at it that way. I know it's
really hard not to resent it though, right? It's
I know
hard.
it totally is.
Right. I mean, that's just a lifelong struggle. It is. Otherwise you're going to be disappointed spending a lot on therapy.
Yeah. My husband said the other day, you know how sometimes other people can define you better than you can define yourself. He said, you function best with flexibility inside of a frame. I was like, okay, that's really good, right? So I need a structure, but then I need the ability to be creative inside of that. So maybe find some flexibility inside your frame.
Hi, I'm Allie. I'm a graphic designer. So I was wondering what advice you have for creatives who are weighing the pros and cons of going to portfolio school versus entering immediately into the industry post-grad.
I should probably take that, right? So we discussed this earlier. I think it comes down to a lot of factors. It's an investment. So A, is that investment an option for you? B, where do you want to go? What do you want to do? So what kind of agency do you want to work at? And then kind of like I said earlier, for me, the value was twofold. I loved that I got to spend 2 years only focused on building a portfolio, refining it, toughening my skin up. I mean, honestly, for me, I can't imagine what I emotionally would have been like going into an agency right out of school, just because I just needed to get tougher. And then also the second part of it was just really that ability to have a group of people around me who only wanted to do what I wanted to do. Those were really my two things. Look at the industry. There are, thousands and thousands of people who have gotten into the industry, both with portfolio school and without it. I think you can get in for sure in many ways. We were talking earlier, you guys have, a massive advantage with the way that you do internships here. We've had a number of people come and work at Barkley as interns, and after their internship, if I were to put their portfolio next to maybe somebody coming out of a portfolio school, their portfolio might not be stronger, but because I got to have a summer getting to know them, understanding their inherent talents that might not be readily available in their portfolio just yet, I wanted to hire them on the spot way more than someone who I had never met. So I think leverage those opportunities. And then really it just comes down to your personal choice of, can you make that investment? And if you can, where do you want to go? I would say I got out of portfolio school and my first 2 job offers were Crispin and Wyden, 2 places I never imagined I was going to work. And that was really amazing. And I worked really hard for 2 years for that to happen. But I could have, I certainly could have gone to other agencies and worked my way there eventually, probably.
It's catalytic. It's a catalyst to get you there quicker. It's you're basically paying for the first 2 years of your career to kind of come out at a higher level, more opportunity, more options. And the thing that I tell the students when they start at the Creative Circus is that the thing that you kind of learn in a school like that is how to run your own creative machine, how to deal with those blocks, how to deal with failure, how to feel comfortable knowing what your real style and your instinct, sort of your own design sensibility, your own sort of, I guess your creative machine is the best way to put it, who you are as a creative and who you are as a professional. So I'd say we're much more a subset of the industry than of education. It's really your career starts when you start at a portfolio school, but you're paying for it. It's much more intense, and you finish it with more options. I don't want to sit here and sell the school, but I think people don't regret going.
Hi, I'm Sarah. My question is, in your opinion, what is one thing when you're in your new job, what is one thing that you can do to really set yourself up for success within that agency and then overall just for the rest of your career, if you could pick one thing?
Positivity. You'll see it. You work really hard. You have to deal with a lot of things that are constantly changing. And one of my biggest pet peeves is when it's like midnight and something changed and everybody decides that they'd rather sit around and complain for 30 minutes as opposed to solving it for 15. So being really positive and being, just continuing to, I talk a ton about problem solving. Like if you really look at your job as problem solving, and sometimes your problem to solve is a brief, and sometimes your problem to solve is whatever creative feedback you just got, and sometimes your problem to solve is a timeline that just got bumped up by a week. And if you can see every problem that comes your way as something that's fun to solve, then your whole job becomes more fun. So positivity and the way that you sort of approach things, I think, is huge.
That's good.
That's
a good answer.
He concurs.
Resilience, for sure, yeah. I did not have that a lot. I did not have a lot of positivity. And there's a horrible story about my desk was set up in an Ogilvy, and there's a poster that the bottom of the poster was lined up with the floorboard behind my desk because I had kicked a hole through the wall because someone had delivered a brief to us at 5:00 on a Friday that was approved on Tuesday, and that was my weekend. So I just kicked a hole through the wall. I basically complained for 30 minutes instead of solving it for 15. And that's back to the adjustment to the real world. I think that it's about being resilient, for sure. Positive, yeah. It's important. And, your job, I think, is really important. Your job as a younger creative is to make the person above you's job easier. It's to deliver. And I've asked this question on the podcast a lot to senior people. What's the best way for someone to endear themselves to you when they come in? They said, well, give us what's on the brief, give us what we wanted, but bring in something that we didn't ask for, something new, something different. And I think that all kind of feeds into being, taking the ownership on yourself, being resilient and also resourceful, industrious. All right, so you guys know what Barkley is. Barkley, what's the URL? BarkleyUS.com, right? You can Google Katy Hornaday. She has her own website. It's a Squarespace website, right, with work of hers. You can find my podcast at balserville.com because I had that URL when the internet was young. Don't make fun of me. It's also, if you search Dan Balser on iTunes or on your podcast app, the show's called Don't Get Me Started. It's not DGMS. It's called Don't Get Me Started. But these 2 guys from Hollywood started another Don't Get Me Started and immediately are more famous than I am. But I'll be positive. And I thank you guys so much for being here. I think we're supposed to stop at noon, right?
And thank you to Lauren.
Thank you guys. Is that stream still going?